Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily commentary about the news of the day. The news today is very nice. They're closing in on Hillary. Not there yet, but getting there. And you can see the steel circle gradually closing. What happened today was that a couple of weeks ago, or actually 2 or 3 months ago, and then 2 or 3 weeks ago, Bob Goodlatte, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, sent a letter to Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, recommending the appointment of a special prosecutor to go after Hillary and the Clinton Foundation, to investigate Comey's leaks of memos of his conversations with the president, to investigate the FBI handling of the email probe into Hillary's use of the private email that she collected. And each time they did not get a reply from Sessions. So yesterday, late yesterday, there was apparently a telephone call between the Assistant Attorney General, one step under Sessions, and a member of the committee, or the chairman of the committee, Bob Goodlatte. And in the phone call, Sessions people said that Sessions had directed them to investigate the situation and to see if there was a factual basis for naming an independent counsel, a special prosecutor. There has to be a clear suspicion of crimes, and there has to be a finding that it would not be possible or appropriate for those crimes to be prosecuted successfully within the normal parameters of the Justice Department. So there was that forwarding, that request, and that spawned a series of stories, including a lead article in the New York Times, that Sessions was moving closer to naming a special prosecutor. That was the first time that the words had in effect crossed his lips, and the first time there had been an indication of a serious effort to do that. Then today, at a hearing at the Senate Judiciary Committee, Sessions was testifying, and he used the opportunity to walk back a little bit on the special prosecutor, saying that he had not found the necessary criminal predicate yet, but that he was investigating it and was looking at that. And that led to a sharp exchange between Sessions and the chairman of the committee, Bob Goodlatte. Goodlatte said, numerous matters connected with the 2016 election remain unresolved. And he said, you have recused yourself from matters, he's talking to Sessions now, stemming from the 2016 election. But there are significant concerns that the partisanship of the FBI and the department has weakened the ability of each to act objectively, which is really a shot across the Attorney General's bow and looping in the FBI into that. Very significant statement by the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Sessions fired back and said, there comes a time when we have to... I'm sorry, let me just read that to you. Anyway, it in effect said, there comes a time when you have to look at the facts dispassionately and objectively and come to a decision. And so far, we have not determined that there's a basis for appointing a special prosecutor. And then various other committee members jumped in, including Jim Jordan, a conservative Republican from Ohio, and began pressing it. Jordan said, it sure looks like a major political party was working with the federal government so they could get a warrant to spy on President Trump's campaign. And then Sessions shot back. I would say that looks like is not enough of a basis to appoint a special counsel. It would take a factual basis that meets the standard of a special counsel for the Justice Department to make such an appointment. We will use the proper standards, and that's the only thing I can tell you, Mr. Jordan, Sessions said to Jordan. You have your idea, but sometimes we have to study the facts here and evaluate whether it meets the standard that's required. So there's now this back and forth and Sessions is clearly in the hot seat. But the door has been opened here. Sessions has said that he's considering it, and he's said that they're investigating it to find out if there is a factual basis. Now, this is a long way up from when the idea of a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary was really a fringe idea, and nobody had really supported it, and now it really is gaining momentum. I think the meaning of that exchange is that it's inevitable that that's going to happen. The more that gets discovered about this scandal, the more information that comes out, the more it's going to push Sessions in that direction. And I think what this says is he's not there yet, but it will take another push. But as more information comes out and more evidence comes out, it's inevitable that there will be that push. So right now I feel more optimistic about there being a special prosecutor than I have since this began.
Dick J. Wagner asks, can we expect to see Hillary in prison before long?
Well, that's about 10 steps removed from this. But I do think that there will be a prosecutor. I think there will be an investigation. I think there will be criminality found on Hillary's part, and then we'll have to see where that goes from here. But this is clearly now a serious and significant possibility. And for Hillary, it has to be terrifying, because the other two times that she's faced independent counsels, once over Watergate and once over the billings at the Rose Law Firm, once over Watergate and Whitewater and the billings of the Rose Law Firm, and once over the firings of the travel office staff, she was surrounded by the White House. She had the president, she had the justice officials, she had the FBI, she had all of those agencies pushing on her behalf. Now she'd have to face this stuff without that support, and that's going to be a very dangerous thing for her. And this is very ominous news for Hillary.
And Peggy Lockwood asks, still wondering what exactly the U.S. and its citizens received out of that Uranium One deal. Hillary got $135 million plus, and Podesta got at least $35 million. So what did we get?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing. There is no possible argument you could make that this was in the interest of the United States. The best you could do would be to say it was not against the interests of the United States. But that's belied by the fact that Putin worked like hell to achieve this, and basically spent 10 years trying to get it through, maneuvering the sale of the uranium originally in Kazakhstan to Uranium One, then moving to take over Uranium One, then moving to buy Uranium One as a company and lining up support within the administration for it and paying off Bill a $500,000 personal bribe, basically a speaking fee, about this issue, and lining up $140 million that you referenced there of contributions by Frank Giustra, who arranged this whole thing to the Clinton Foundation. And if you look at how hard he's worked on this, obviously it's in the Russian national interest and not in America's. See, we are not self-sufficient in uranium. We don't have all the uranium we need for our nuclear plants to operate, for our nuclear deterrent to be effective, for bombs to be made and upgraded and kept action ready. We need to import uranium. And to walk off with a fifth of our uranium production can never be in the national interest.
And Dick, Rhonda Strubhar asks, Sessions sure seemed, she's commenting, Sessions sure seemed forgetful, talking in circles. He sure doesn't seem on top of the serious job of Attorney General. Very concerning.
Yeah, well, he's caught. I think that what's going on here is that he's pushed and pulled between, on the one hand, the demands of his boss, the president, and of his party, the Republicans, and of his own knowledge of what's right and wrong, and on the other hand, the need to observe the norms of the Justice Department. It's no small thing to, after a presidential election, launch a criminal investigation of the person he just defeated. That's never happened before. The person who loses usually goes off into the sunset, and even if they're planning to run again, there's no investigation of them. there's no action against them. It sounds just like a banana republic in South America, where the guy loses and he immediately is locked up in prison. In fact, in South America, most of the time, the losing candidate gets himself elected to Congress because that gives him immunity from prosecution, and that's how he stays out of jail. We don't want that kind of precedent in the United States. And I'm sure a lot of the officials in the Justice Department are warning Sessions about that and saying, come on, we can't go down that road. This is not how we function in the United States. There was a comment by former Attorney General Michael McCaskey, who is Bush's Attorney General. Putting political opponents in jail for offenses committed in a political setting is something that we don't do here. So that's a very important statement and a very important opposition. So he has to overcome that. And to overcome it, he has to show that he's reluctant, that he's driven by the facts, not by partisanship, and that he really has no alternative. So there has to be a big quantum of evidence and of initiative to move him in that direction, because the forces against it are so strong. And I think what you're looking for here is Sessions is saying, hey, if you want me to name a special prosecutor, give me more evidence, give me more information, push me harder, and eventually I'll give you what you need. But not unless you actually make me and twist my arm and leave me with no choice.
And Jerry Houston asks, what must be completed to engage military intelligence over other three-letter agencies like the CIA, NSA, and DHS, etc.?
Well, to engage it in what? They're working on national security issues. To enlist their help in a investigation like this, once there's a special prosecutor, he can call on the resources of the entire government within legal limits, of constitutional rights. But I guess that's what you mean, and that certainly is possible. The answer to your question is that any independent counsel can, in fact, do that. Now, there is an interesting perspective on North Korea. Let me go into that field for a minute. There are two reporters who, actually they're not journalists, they're academics, I think, who've developed a relationship with North Korea over the years. They're American. And they've met frequently, or periodically, with the leaders of North Korea. Off the record, and have spoken with them about what's going on and what their perspective is. And they gave a lengthy interview to the New York Times where they downloaded the conversations they've had with Kim Jong-un and with the other leaders of North Korea. And to put it bluntly, they were asking one question: is Trump nuts? Is Trump crazy? And basically Kim Jong-un is asking that. How far can I push this guy before he really sends missiles and nuclear weapons back at me? Is he nuts? Is he saying when Trump tweets about how I'm a fat little boy, and when he starts talking about how he'll turn North Korea into a parking lot, do I take that seriously? Is he really a maniac? Is there somebody who might do that? And basically what he's saying is, am I the only maniac in town, or there is another one at the other side of the rink facing me? And it's a very interesting perspective. And I've quoted this to you before, but it bears repeating. Richard Nixon said when he became president, at the time when the U.S. and Russia both had the capacity to wipe each other out, but nobody would do it, said the first thing the President of the United States needs to do is to convince the leader of the Soviet Union that he's nuts, that he's crazy, that he could push the button, that he could launch a nuclear war, and that anything is possible. And that element of unpredictability, of the possibility of, just a moment of insanity, is so important to preserving the effectiveness of the deterrent, because nobody in their right mind would push the button. And he, in effect, was saying the president has to convince the Russians that he's not completely in his right mind. Now, for Nixon, that was pretty easy to do. But it's quite a challenge. And in effect, Trump is meeting that challenge with the North Koreans. So there's a big swell of criticism about how Trump is alienating North Korea, that when he attacks North Korea, they're taking it personally, that he's building up a macho challenge to North Korea, that it's going to have to answer somehow, and that Trump is a warmonger, basically fomenting a possible military confrontation. And I sharply reject that. I think that is just wrong, and I think it completely misreads how you have to handle a country like that. I think that you have to understand that the niceties of diplomacy, the niceties of diplomatic language, don't work on a guy like that. You have to meet fire with fire. He's a thug, and you need to talk to him like a thug and like a bully. And that's just what Trump is doing. And he's matching him crazy statement for crazy statement, and basically saying, you want to blow up the world? Be my guest. You die first. And I think that that's exactly the right approach for Trump to take. And all the people in the U.S., including the members of Trump's administration, who are wringing their hands and saying, oh, don't alienate him, don't make him angry, don't put him in a position where he has to save face. I think they're completely missing the point. When you're dealing with a guy like that, the only way to deal with him is what Nixon said. You have to convince him that you're capable of anything. And this interesting report from these two academics who met with Kim Jong-un within the last few weeks really shows the effectiveness of what Trump is doing. It shows how right he is in what he's trying to do.
Dick, Sharon Ingram wants to know, do you think that Russia sells the uranium that we sell to Russia is then sold to North Korea?
Well, it's sold. When Putin took over the uranium reserves, Uranium One, the company, signed an agreement saying it would not export any of the uranium that was mined in the United States. And now it came out that between 2012 and 2014, about a third of that uranium was indeed exported, much of it to Canada, but we don't know the destination of all of it. So yeah, that's entirely possible, or to North Korea, or to any of the bad guys around the world. Now, very interesting perspective on North Korea. Now, I've talked to you, I think, before about this crazy, outrageous, terrible law that protects Congress and congressmen and senators and their staffs from being charged with sexual harassment. It's essentially a carte blanche to go out and harass anybody you want. Whereas every other person in the United States can be sued for sexual harassment. And you can submit evidence, you can prosecute it, you can litigate it as a civil matter, a tort with you as the plaintiff, if you're the woman who is the victim. And then if there's a judgment, the harasser has to deep down into his pocket and come up with the money and pay you. It happens for everybody in the country except for one group of people, members of the House and Senate and their staffs. They alone have immunity because they voted it for themselves. So if a senator or a congressman or their senior staff sexually harasses somebody on this staff or a lobbyist or someone else who walks in, they cannot be prosecuted for it. What has to happen is that the accuser has to enter counseling and mediation with the person who she says harassed her. And there have to be meetings and discussions and seeing if he can work that out, which is a real incentive not to bring the complaint. You have to sit in the same room with the congressman or with the senator and say, you did this, and he says, I didn't, and you say he did, and it's back and forth, and it's really tough, and it's messy. And it's a good reason not to complain. But that's not as bad. The real thing is that if you win and you get a judgment against the guy, he doesn't pay it. We do. There's a special fund created in the Treasury to pay sexual harassment claims against members of Congress and their senior staff. And to date, since 1995, when this terrible law was passed, there's been $15.2 million paid out from this fund to victims of sexual harassment in 356 different cases. Now, this is outrageous. They don't have to pay for the consequences of their actions. There's no publicity. It's not reported in the media. There's nothing on the record that goes there. And on top of it, there's every reason for the accuser not to bring this action up in the first place because of this so-called mediation period. Well, now with all of the publicity going on, Kristen Gillibrand, the absolute phony who is the Republican senator from New York State, is riding to the rescue. And she's introducing a bill and getting applauded for the courage she's showing. And her bill says that you don't have to do as much counseling and mediation. You can do some, but not as much. And it says that we're going to set up sensitivity training for senators and congressmen and senior staff about sexual harassment, to warn them off it and to tell them what are the lines that you shouldn't cross. But no reform at all in the payment of the judgment by the government rather than by the individual. No change in that at all. A complete whitewash under the heading of reforming this practice. In fact, it has nothing to do with reforming. You can read the news articles about what Gillibrand's doing to the very end, which I did today, and there was no mention of any reform in the process where the members don't actually pay the judgments that are cited against them. None whatsoever. Now, this is just outrageous. It's terrible. And it shows that these guys who now are lining up righteously against Roy Moore in Alabama and point fingers at each other when they're accused of sexual harassment have taken great steps to make sure that their conduct never comes under scrutiny. By the way, while we're on the subject of Gillibrand, let me unload on her a little bit. She's the junior senator from New York. She took Hillary Clinton's seat. And she's a total faker and a phony. Her name didn't used to be Kristen Gillibrand. It was Kathy something or other. And she changed her name because under her old name, she worked for Philip Morris, the tobacco company, defending them and protecting tobacco against the lawsuits. And she wanted to cover that up, so she changed her name. When she angled for the appointment to the Senate seat, and it was Governor Patterson, who was governor at the time, who had been lieutenant governor and had taken the governorship when Governor Eliot Spitzer had to resign because of a sex scandal. And Gillibrand wanted that appointment. So she and her father and David Boies, the very influential Democratic lawyer who represented Gore in Bush v. Gore, contributed money to Patterson. They paid him a total of 2 gifts of $500,000 each to his re-election fund. He didn't actually run for re-election, but he got the money. And after those gifts were given, he decided Gillibrand was the right person for the job, and he appointed her. And this person who got into office by this phony finagling now is trying to pull a fast one and sell herself as the one who's forcing Congress to be accountable on the issue of sexual harassment, as phony as Washington can get.
Dick, Matthew James and a few others would like to know, since you knew Hillary Clinton, what are your thoughts on her current state of mind, and what is she likely and currently doing in light of what's going on?
Oh, I think she's bouncing off the wall. I think she's absolutely going crazy. The insight I have is based on a personal conversation I had with her. Bill hinted to me that when Hillary was facing scrutiny and had to go before a grand jury, that he'd heard rumors that she might be indicted. And if she did, and he wanted me to go to Hillary and sound her out about how she would feel about a guilty plea and a pardon. And Bill didn't have the guts to tell Hillary that personally, so he asked me to do it. So I did. Hillary writes about this in her memoirs and says that it wasn't from Bill, said she assumed I was, quote, carrying water for my Republican clients. But I wasn't. I was carrying water for her husband. And I went to Hillary with that, and she had a total fit. She said, I would not accept a pardon. I don't want a pardon. You tell him that's the last thing in the world I want. That if Ken Starr wants to F with me and wants to go ahead and do this, then he's going to take on a fight he wished he never had. I'm going to kill him over this. I'm going to destroy him. And I'm not going to let my reputation be sullied. And she went screaming and on and on and on. And I think that's what's going on right now. The problem is for her is she's got a decreasing number of people who listen to her because she has no power, she has no role, she has no staff really. She has money, so she can hire people on her own. But the last thing in the world she'd want to do is spend her own money. I think she'll set up a legal defense fund and rely on that.
On the subject of Clinton, there was a gentleman watching yesterday. His name is Douglas Coolidge, and his mom was in the room, but I missed the question. And he wants to know, my mom doesn't believe the story about Bill tackling you on the lawn. Will you please tell her it's true? She's listening with me right now. Now, I know that there was an altercation. I don't know if it was on the lawn.
It wasn't on the lawn.
I didn't think so.
No, it's on a hard concrete floor, not the lawn. Lawn would have been okay. Yeah, this was in 1990, in May of 1990. And Bill was running for his last term as governor. And he had been wondering whether he should run for governor in 1990 and then go for president in 92, whether he should skip the race of 1990 and just run for president in 92. And he was weighing those options. Hillary, by the way, in the meantime said, if Bill isn't going to run, I want to run for governor. And I did a poll for Hillary and found that she couldn't win. Oddly enough, back then, people thought she was a pawn of her husband, didn't see her as an independent person, and saw her as just a puppet who Bill would put up as a place warmer in the governorship in case he lost the presidency. That made Hillary furious. Anyway, Bill decided to run, and he associated me with the decision to do that. And I wanted him to run because I said, you don't want somebody else. You can't get her elected, and you don't want a political enemy controlling the state and the records and the state police and the treasury and all of that stuff, and dumping on your role as governor. So he ran, and in the primary, a non-entity who had very little chance to win gained very sharply on him and really looked like he might beat him. And I was meeting with Bill 4 weeks before the primary, and I had to bring him a poll that showed that he was beginning to fall behind and that he might actually lose this race. We ultimately pulled it out. We ran a lot of negative ads against his opponent, and we defeated him. But it looked pretty bleak there for a couple of days. And Bill had, I think, had some drinks. Bill could not handle liquor. He's a non-drinking alcoholic. Whenever he has a drink, he just can't handle it. And this, I think, was one of those moments. It was very late at night, and I was, I have to confess, a little impatient too, because the meeting was supposed to be at 7 or 8, and it was midnight, and it was just getting underway. And I had been to a dentist and had had a dry socket, you know, when they pull a tooth and it becomes messed up. And I was not taking painkillers, because I needed to be clear-minded to brief Bill on what was going on. And the tensions between us were very high. And he started yelling at me, which he hadn't done before. This was the first time he'd ever really, he does that a lot, but he never used to do it with me. And he started yelling at me. And he said, you're effing me, you're effing me. You don't give a damn about me. You got me to run again so you could make some extra money. And you're effing me. And he said, you're not paying any attention to my race. You're too busy working all over the rest of the country. And because you're effing me, I'm in trouble now. And it's all your fault. And you're not doing anything about it. And I was, in fact, working very hard to turn the race around, and very successfully. 3 or 4 days later, he developed a lead over his opponent, added to the lead, and never had to look back. And I thought that that would work, but it hadn't worked yet. So I was furious at his yelling at me. And I had become a full-time Republican at that point in 1990. I converted in 1988. But the only Democrat I was handling in the country was Bill Clinton, because I had a 20-year relationship with him. I grandfathered in the contract. And I had met with Newt Gingrich a few days before. And Newt said, look, I want to put you to work for the Republican Party. I think you can help us a lot, but I can't as long as you're involved with Bill Clinton. So I was annoyed at that, and now Clinton was telling me that I was screwing him. So I lost it, and I yelled back at him. And I said, you solved my problem for me. I used to be a 49-state Republican. Now I can be a 50-state Republican, and Gingrich will hire me. You've solved my problem. Go F this race up on your own. And I stormed out of the governor's mansion. And he ran after me. I heard these hoofbeats behind me. And he grabbed me around the waist, and he threw me to the ground and knelt over me with his fist back to punch me. And Hillary grabbed his arm and pulled him back and said, Bill, stop. Think of what you're doing. Stop, Bill, stop. And there was another person in the room named Gloria Cabe. And Hillary was just hysterical trying to pull him off me because he was going to slug me. And I would have decked him, by the way, but, he only had about 100 pounds and a foot and a half on me. But in any case, when Hillary grabbed him, he sobered up a little bit, and he got to his feet, still red-faced, but sputtering apologies. And I got up and I stormed out of the mansion, cursing at him, and ran outside. And Hillary ran after me and walked me around the grounds of the governor's mansion. Normally a state trooper came and would take me back to my hotel. But here she said, no, leave him here. I need to talk to him. And she walked me around. She said, he doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean it. He values you. He loves you. He cares about you. He needs you. We all need you. And then she said something to me that I will always remember. She said, he only does this, meaning hits me, to people he loves.
Oh.
So you process that and tell me what you think she meant. Anyway, that was it. I told my wife, I called Eileen, and I was fiercely mad. And I made a mistake. I called a colleague of mine, another political consultant, who I was a friend with, and I told him the story. And from him, it circulated all over the place. And I was asked about it by the media in 1992 when Bill ran for president. And I called Hillary and said, what do you want me to say? And she said immediately, tell him it didn't happen. Lie. So, but I didn't. I just refused to talk about it. Sorry for the old war stories, but you asked.
Everyone wants to know. First of all, we're also #1 in the world right now, and we're close to 2,000. We're at 1,900
with that
right
story,
now.
We deserve to share that around. I think a lot of people would love to see it.
Yes, they would.
Never hit me again, by the way. Yelled at me again, but never hit me again.
We have a question from Greg Blazingame, and also Anna Strange wants to know the answer to
I just
this.
want to say one other thing.
Oh, sure.
In 1993, in the White House, I met with Hillary, and there was another man in the room with me, a friend of mine. And we both agreed after the meeting. Hillary had sunglasses on through the whole meeting. Bill is left-handed. And we both agreed that the right side of her face was covered with black and blue marks, disguised by the glasses, disguised by makeup, but you could see him. Just submitting that to you.
So the question is, when Obama was caught on the open mic telling the Russian ambassador to tell Putin he would have more flexibility, quote unquote, after the election, what is your insight about whether that fits into any of these scandals?
Well, it may well fit into the uranium scandal. May well. The comment about flexibility also related to the U.S. not being aggressive against Russia when it took over the Crimea in the Ukraine. And I'm not sure what he meant by that, but as you look back in history, it could well have been the uranium scandal. Good for you for bringing it up in that context. Let me just cover a couple of other things. There is now a bipartisan push to change the Dodd-Frank bill that regulates financial institutions. And I haven't seen the details, but it makes a lot of sense to me. The problem with Dodd-Frank has always been that it comes down like a ton of bricks on banks that have no reason to be regulated like that. They didn't cause the subprime crisis. They didn't cause the mortgage crisis. They didn't bet on derivatives. They ran a basic sound banking practice. And they're small community banks. And because of the standards in Dodd-Frank, they've been terrified to make loans. They haven't invested money in their communities because, God forbid, any of these loans go south. The federal regulators tell them, we'll close your bank, we'll fire you, your pension goes away, and we'll impose a new board of directors. And what in fact they've done in hundreds of cases is force these small banks to merge with larger banks and basically lose their autonomy, their independence, their power, and much of their financial clout. The number of banks in the United States under Obama dropped from about 850 to about 600 because of mergers forced by the Dodd-Frank bill. And none of the banks in question were guilty of any of these shenanigans. The banks that were guilty of it, the six biggest ones, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and so on, those banks had very little happen to them. They were regulated. They had to do a lot more paperwork. They had to put up with a lot of audits. But they folded that into the cost of doing business. They even had to pay fines that were huge. But they took a hit that quarter and then lived to tell about it. But the small banks were really victimized. And I think it's one of the big reasons that quantitative easing never worked, the pushing of money into the economy. Because while on the one hand the feds were pushing the money out, on the other hand they were telling the banks who got the money, don't lend it, because if any of these loans doesn't work out, it's your rear that's going to end up in serious trouble. Now what this bill does is it ratchets back the regulation of the smaller banks, encourages mortgage lending, and does some very good stuff. Now I haven't seen the details of the bill, and I want to make sure it doesn't let the big boys off the hook. There needs to be much better regulation of them. Not penalties, but jail time. Penalties, financial penalties, mean nothing to these guys. They just write it off, and absolutely nothing. But if you start putting them in jail, it means everything. And Obama's act, which he used to deceive America, was to tell them, look at how tough I'm being. I just got a $30 billion verdict against this bank. But in fact, he didn't criminally prosecute any of the people, and none of them went to jail. You give out jail sentences of 6 months, and you'll change their behavior. The key is not to depend on fines. The other thing that's going on that's really interesting is that Trump has now insisted and succeeded in getting a repeal of the mandate to buy health insurance into the tax cut bill that's going through the Senate. It's not yet in the House version, but I'm sure it will be, and I'm sure it'll be part of the final law. And that will set in motion a series of events that will end Obamacare once and for all. And it's a last-minute thing. Most people don't appreciate the importance of it. But if you don't make people buy insurance, younger, healthier people won't buy it. And as a result, the ones who enter Obamacare will be older and sicker, and you'll have to raise the cost of the premiums. And that'll drive more young, healthy people out. The pool gets older, the pool gets sicker, the premiums go higher, and a vicious cycle sets in that will result at the end of Obamacare. And that's a good thing. We'll take care of those people by covering them by something called the PCIP, the Pre-Existing Conditions Insurance Program, that helps 132,000 people who have serious conditions that can't really be covered by insurance, like Medicare. It's under Medicare, basically. But the repeal of that mandate sets in motion the end of Obamacare, and Trump has brilliantly insisted on including that, and it's wonderful that he's done that. I'm going to take more questions in a minute, but I want to tell you that this video, as the others, is sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. And I've been explaining that China is now the only country in the world that is saying we will change our currency for gold. You can't go to a bank and get $1 worth of gold for a dollar bill. You couldn't until 1933, when FDR prohibited it as part of fighting the Great Depression, and was never restored. No other country does it, but China is doing it. And they're doing it to encourage countries to shed the dollar, stop using it, particularly for oil purchases, and instead to use the yuan, their currency, which you can then switch into gold. That is going to create a huge increased demand for gold, and is going to send that gold price rising dramatically. So get in on the ground floor and go to the patriotgoldgroup.com. The phone number is on the screen here, and get started in gold, and you're getting in on the ground floor of what is going to be likely a huge price increase. The last thing, and then I'll take out your questions, is that we now have the income tax revenues from the last quarter, and the Treasury Department took in $136 billion in the last month, not quarter, the last month, the month of October, 136 billion. Last year it took in 126. The year before that it took in 120. So it's up 16 billion. Over 12 years, 12 months, that's 200 billion. And that's before the tax cut. That's why these projections that we're going to have $1.5 trillion deficit and 20 trillion of the national debt are ridiculous, because the stimulative effect of these measures is going to so drive up the tax revenues that these deficits will never really materialize. I worked for Clinton when we were the only administration since Eisenhower to balance the federal budget for 3 years in a row. And we didn't do it by spending cuts. We didn't do it by tax increases. We did it by tax decreases. We lowered the capital gains rate, and revenues from capital gains skyrocketed. And that permitted us to balance the budget, called the Laffer curve. The same thing is going to happen here.
Well, first of all, Eileen Kelly Benford says, I so appreciate you telling the unvarnished truth about the Clintons and other swamp creatures in Washington. And we have a question here from William Martin. What has happened in Bernie Sanders and his wife's fraud case?
Oh, I don't know. I want to know that. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. I'll let you know. For those who don't know that, it's really his wife. It's not Bernie. But Jane Sanders, I think is her name, was the head of, I think it was Bennington College in Vermont. And she wanted to expand the college. And to do that, she bought real estate, and she paid for it with a bank loan. And she got the bank to lend her money by telling them how much she would raise in the coming year as part of their fundraising drive. And she didn't raise it. She didn't raise anything like it. The estimates were wildly optimistic. And the question is, did she just make a mistake? Or was that a deliberate fraud of overestimating the revenues, deceiving the bank, and deceiving the federal regulators? And that's the question being investigated.
Yesterday you had talked about, or maybe it was I think it was yesterday, about how Congress people, they're excluded from sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Okay, so John Wheeler wants to know that he says, I really enjoy your informative show. Learned something I did not know. The law passed in 1995 for those in Congress who with taxpayer money is found liable for sexual harassment settle. Are their names made public?
I don't know. I don't think so. Otherwise we'd have that list, but I don't know. Okay. 356 of them for $13.2 million that you and I paid for them to have a good time.
Mm. And Noelle Horvath wants to know if we know how many signatures we have yet on the petition, or the poll for Roy Moore. Oh,
93% of you voted that he should not resign and should stay in the race. And that's important because the establishment is doing all it can to bounce him out of that race. And Gloria Allred an attorney who is a headline grabber, is on the case now, and believe me, she'll turn out a string of women who will say, "Oh, it happened to me," and wait till my forthcoming book comes out that tells all, and you can buy it for only $29.99. So you want him to stay in, and I do too. We'll see how that goes. You can vote in that poll by going to dickmorris.com and vote in it, and we'll send your email to Roy and to other people in Congress so they can stop calling on him to drop out.
It's also posted on your main Facebook page, your public official page. Mike Bauer asks, is it true that the Clinton Foundation got $131 million 3 years before Uranium One?
It's probably true. They got $145 million from Frank Giustra after Clinton did a favor for the president of Kazakhstan, in return for which Giustra got access to Kazakhstan's uranium, which he then parlayed into buying a share in Uranium One, which then sold out to the Russians, and Giustra made all of his money back. Now that question related to the Clinton Foundation. Read it to me again. It reminded me of something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put it in my deleted already.
Yeah.
But about $131 million 3 years before Uranium One.
Anyway, the Clinton Foundation was a piggy. Yes, that's what I was thinking.
I can retrieve it.
I got it. The Clinton Foundation was a piggy bank for Bill and Hillary Clinton. It was a slush fund. And they took their money and they basically spent it on overhead for staffing, air travel, and all kinds of stuff. Everything but giving it away to other charities.
And let's see. I apologize. Whoops. Sharon Castillo wants to know, and we know the answer, I think, but do you think Rudy Giuliani would make a good attorney general or else special counsel? She must be new to the show.
Yeah, Rudy would. I love Rudy. Yeah, he's a former client of mine. I love him. I have to phrase this gently. Whenever you're dealing with somebody who's in their 70s or 80s, Rudy's in his 70s, you have to ask yourself how their energy level is and how their ability to function is. And I haven't heard a lot out of Rudy since the presidential election. So if he's feeling good and if he's in good shape, you couldn't ask for anyone better to prosecute Hillary. He probably has prosecuted Hillary in his mind 100 times.
And Mark Hill wants to know, who are the biggest establishment players in the swamp? Democrats and Republicans. Do they cooperate? Are they globalists? What ties them?
What ties them is each other. Ted Cruz said it best when he said, it's a duopoly, not a monopoly of either one, but a duopoly. They work together. And they play different sides of the field, but it's the same game, and they cooperate with each other. And they give the appearance of a choice, and of conflict even, but it's not a choice. It's not a conflict. I'll give you a good example. This bill on sexual harassment we're talking about. Gillibrand is sponsoring it. Oh, what a great reform by a courageous female Democratic senator. And I'll bet the Republicans line up and say, oh, that's going too far. We should be more reasonable. And both sides admit it's a pathetic bill. It'll do nothing. It doesn't make them pay for their own conduct. But by playing off each other, they can give you the impression that they're fighting for your interest. But don't believe it. Now, I want to thank David Garcia Hidalgo and his father, Ivan Garcia Hidalgo, for the selfie of the day, where they're holding up a copy of my book, Rogue Spooks. Now, Rogue Spooks is becoming truer and truer every single day. All of the new information about fusion, about the meetings at Trump Tower, all that stuff is and the dossier is all outlined in that book. So get yourself a copy of it. And if you want to give it as a gift to somebody over Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, get me to sign a book plate personalized to you. You can do that by going to Dick Morris Promos at gmail.com. right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, good.
And before you do the shout out, I just learned that one of your loyal followers, her name is Celine Cuomo, her father passed away.
Oh, gee, I'm
So
sorry.
she's real
I'm
loyal
sorry,
follower.
Celine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My father died in 2010. He was born in 1910. He died at 100, but it doesn't get any easier. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and the shout out for Bill Field. He wrote to you, first of all, your page seems long overdue, and then you had given him a thumbs up when he wrote that, and he wrote, I am an unapologetic liberal, but I've always believed virtually everything you've ever said.
Oh, good, good. Well, thank you.
So that's that.
Well, thank you, guys. Women, I'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thanks a lot.